Today, we're talking about the key takeaways from day 3 of training camp for the Chicago Bulls. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Mazella's slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family as we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it as we are talking about the key takeaways from day 3 of training camp for the Chicago Bulls. And so let's go ahead and let's start with the latest injury update around the Chicago Bulls, and starting with Patrick Williams. And so we talked about Patrick Williams yesterday. He tweaked his ankle. He left, he came back, and then he got on the stationary bike. Billy Donovan said it wasn't anything serious and that we would find out more about him today. Well, Patrick Williams was able to come out to practice and be a full participant. And so that is the update with him. He is good to go. Then next, Josh Giddey. And so he does mention this today, talking about Billy Donovan, and he said that Josh Giddey actually tweaked his ankle yesterday, but he was out there practicing today. They did keep him out of the running, and that he will be a full participant tomorrow. And so that's the update around Josh Giddey and Patrick Williams. Both of those are great updates, and so, that's the latest there. Next, I wanted to go ahead and jump into Billy Donovan and really what he had to say in his presser, and talking about just really the approach for this team, and then also to him talking about some other things about some players here. And so first, starting with the approach this upcoming season. And so just paraphrasing this, but Billy Donovan, he talks about playing at a good speed and also to playing well in half court when the game slows down. And so I've talked about this several times on the podcast, and I'm just talking about the fact that the Bulls will be able to get up and down the floor, and they're going to be able to get shots, but there's going to be times where, the game is going to slow down, and you're going to have to execute in the half court game, and you want to be crisp, just with your ball movement, player movement, and everything else, and be just as creative as you are, in the open floor. And so, I think that this is probably going to be the next step for this team. And I really think that they are going to take another step, especially when you hear Billy Donovan talking about installs and things like that. I really think that they just kind of gave the team the basic on the offense last year and kind of let this team grow. And I think that you're going to see this team be much better in its reads, especially in the half-court game. And I think that you're going to see the team take another step forward. But let's see what happens, with this team and the playing style just on the offensive end. And so next, Billy Donovan talks about being professional. And so I didn't talk about this in yesterday's video, but he had talked about Javon Carter and how he really stayed ready. And he talked about how he came out in that Atlanta game and hit all those three-pointers and things like that, and how he really appreciated his approach. And so he's asked about Jalen Smith, because Jalen Smith fell out of the rotation last year. And Billy Donovan said that, look, he praised Jalen Smith for being professional and being ready, and just how he handled things last season. And he felt like that they're going to need all three centers this season. And so Billy Donovan says that, and he kind of dances around the point of just, okay, does he play two bigs out there? He's like, yes, maybe. And so we'll see what happens with that. I've said this before. I would love to see Billy Donovan go out there and put some more size in this lineup and see if they can get an advantage that way. And so let's see what happens with that. But he does mention Jalen Smith and just falling out of the rotation and how he stayed ready and everything else. And then he's asked about Patrick Williams and just really how he looks this season. And so going back to that point with Patrick Williams. And so, with Patrick Williams, he says that, he's coming in, healthy this year. And so that's a plus. And he said that he's more physical and he's looking good in his play so far. And Billy Donovan does say that, look, it's early on. And he also jokes and says that he hasn't taken a charge yet. But talking about Patrick Williams and just saying, hey, it's early on. But so far, he's healthy. And, hey, he's playing a little bit more physical. And so let's see if that translates now to games and everything else. And also, too, if it translates, consistently. And so the next thing that Billy Donovan talks about really is just practice. And so with practice, he indicates that it's been a bit lighter, or it was lighter, today than it was the first 2 days. And so the first 2 days, they were doing the 5-on-5s. He talked about how it was intense. They had the refs out there and everything else. And he talks about the charges and stuff like that. But today, it was a lot of 5-on-0 work, a lot of the installs. So I'm pretty sure he's talking about the offense and the defense. He was talking about the free throws, jump ball situations, sideline, out of bounds stuff. And so really just kind of going on the fundamental kind of stuff like that. And so tomorrow, I think it sounds like that the team is going to ramp things back up again. But today, a light practice based off the first 2 days of practice there. And so next, he talks about this and just really just going forward with this team and just, again, talking about the defense and the identity and stuff like that. And so he continues to talk about physicality. And so that seems to be really, I think, just the story of this team. And so I think that they are really trending in the right direction defensively so far. And so next, I wanted to go ahead and talk about Zac Collins. And so Zac Collins in his presser. And so Zac Collins talks about how he feels a lot better and that he feels like he's past his injury challenges at this point in time. And, also, too, he talks about really the physicality is important for this team. And after the way that they finished last year, he said that everybody really wants to play a lot more physical this year. And also, too, he talked about being motivated after being traded. So he talks about, when Trey Jones, himself, and then also to Kevin Huerter got there, these were players that, not a lot of people really thought that they were going to do very much, but he said that that was motivation and that kind of led into how this team really finished at the end of the year. So Zac Collins talking about that. He does talk a little bit about Trey Jones, and he says that with Trey Jones, you never know what's going to happen with business and everything like that. But he just talked about just the way that Trey Jones played. It just made sense for him to come back to the Chicago Bulls. So talking about that. And so those were kind of the key points, I think, out of Zac Collins and just his presser. And so once again, talking about physicality, just like Billy Donovan has talked about, and really every player that's come up to the podium has talked about that. And so next, talking about Patrick Williams. And so with Patrick Williams, with him, the one thing that he talks about is just really that he acknowledges that last season was just not great for him. And so he was talking about, last season, not his best, and he wants to stay healthy. And he talked about like the time where he played in all 82, and he was like, you got to you take it really for granted and everything else. But, he's talking about like getting into better condition. I think he was also talking about how he has, dropped a little bit of weight too as well. So he slimmed down a bit. And so he didn't go into his weight or anything like that. And so that's one of the things that he wanted to do. And then he also talks about really, just working on his ball handling. He wants to be a little bit more vocal out there because now he's one of the longest tenured Bulls here. And so he wants to be more of a leader here and just more importantly, just stay healthy. And so I think that that was really the key points out of what Patrick Williams had to say. And then, one more thing that I wanted to add to about Billy Donovan that I loved what he had to say, which will lead me to my next point. But he was talking about the team has taken more charges in 3 days of practice than they did in 82 games last season. And so I love that. And he also makes the point too that, when it comes down to winning, like you can't pick and choose what you want to do to win. Like, it's like you have to do certain things. It's not a buffet. And so those are two more points that I wanted to add about Billy Donovan and just really why I think that this team is going to be so much more better just on both ends of the floor. And so that leads me to the last part of the video and just really talking about like the overall theme so far, for training camp. And so I think that the first thing that really comes to mind here is that they're getting to the basics on defense. And I'm reminded of the phrase that, just wherever your energy goes, that's where your focus goes. And it sounds like that the energy around this team is about being physical and being much better on defense. And I think that that is going to translate because they came into last year's training camp and it was the focus of, okay, we got to play faster. We got to be in shape. We got to play faster, do this, do this. But now it sounds like the defense is kind of taking over where that the energy of that offense was last year. And so I think we're going to see something special from this group on the defensive end, I think collectively. And so, again, we got to get to the season, but I just love what we're hearing there. And then next, I think that the offense is going to be more of a surprise because, now you're going to see more installs off of that. And I think about Golden State, and I think about how really they have organized chaos, I like to call it, with their offense, right? It's just high up tempo stuff. But then when they get to the half court, it's constant it's constant picks off the ball and things like that. And it leads to easy baskets. And I think that that's probably the next step for the Chicago Bulls, is just really getting into these half court sets and executing at a high level. And so I'm excited to see if we see that, starting in this preseason game against the Cleveland Cavaliers coming up here on the 7th. And then lastly, I think that the last thing that really comes to mind to me is just that it seems like the Bulls are laying down a foundation for who they want to be as a team. And so it just seems like that this team is really trying to get to its identity. And I love that, because once you have your identity and you really have the foundation of what you want from your team, now you can make the appropriate decisions to build and just to go ahead and get the pieces that you need. So I just think that we're starting to see a little bit more of a direction here for the Chicago Bulls. But anyway, you guys let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking here with the Chicago Bulls, and just, what are your key takeaways so far? Again, it just sounds like that everybody is talking about being more physical. This team is locking in defensively. It sounds like that they're trying to get an identity and just really set a foundation here. And so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. And look, as we always say, go Bulls, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.